Welcome to Get Wilson and Brian Kelly. What if God was also a co-host? What if the historically rare ability to question God directly and get profound answers back has been rediscovered? What would God say to today's sophisticated but deeply troubled world? Get Wisdom Live is here to share those answers with you. Here's Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. Welcome to another episode of Get Wisdom Live. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director, Carl Mollison. This week, yet another exploration of Creator's wisdom, Creator's perspective on white lies and lies of omission. And I've had a sneak peek at the script, Carl, and I thought this was one of the most profound ones I've seen yet.
Well, I think divine wisdom is always profound.
It's true.
What I would say, if anything, in moderation, is that this isn't the most crucial and daunting of subject matter, and many would consider this sort of a side issue and a minor kind of thing. But it's true of all of life and the challenges we face. There's always something to learn from the way we go about living our lives and interacting with others and making choices as we go from moment to moment, let alone day to day.
Yes.
Whether we're going to do it really in divine alignment fully or make some kind of compromise that might be in self-interest. And that is a big one, because that's constant. We're always doing that. Do you give yourself away to others, or do you serve the self? And that balance is all about what life is for and why we're here and the path we're on. So how we do it and the tools we use is important in that respect, so we can learn to do it better.
Yeah. I the reason why I think this is pretty profound is because, so much in this world, especially in terms of religion, just is promulgated as black and white, good and bad, evil, and, so on. And what people are going to hear in these answers is a lot of gray, It's really, this is a lesson in the art of living that we're getting today, Carl, and a very profound one. So I think we should get underway here. You asked Creator. Monica Raymond said, "Little white lies are part of everyday life. If you're in court being charged with a felony, you're probably going to be tempted to lie. Or if your girlfriend asks you if the sweater she's wearing makes her look fat, you're going to lie because you love that person. There are different reasons and justifications to lie. It's human nature." What is Creator's perspective?
All right, and this is the answer I channeled from Creator. We would say lying is only human nature because your perspective of human nature is at a very human level and culturally conditioned to have a low bar of performance, because you are unaware largely of the divine realm and how things operate on that higher plane and the consequences for all beings if they become out of alignment. The reality you face is that almost all humans are somewhat or greatly out of divine alignment. And under such conditions, people will serve themselves first and do what keeps them safe or gives them some kind of advantage. Such self-serving conduct is not in divine alignment, because the ideal is to serve the self with no harm to others and to raise up others with no harm to the self. In other words, do not make waves, harm no one, the self included, but always considering the other party to any kind of interaction. This indeed is a high standard, particularly in your realm when many of the people you deal with are flawed, maybe deeply so, and can be expected to use any perceived advantage against you. So to give up your control of things to some extent out of fairness might end up destroying you if they take unfair advantage. And in your world, that is all too likely to happen. So we see what this individual is saying quite clearly about the practicalities of lying. There indeed are criminals who are not of the most hardened sort, and upon being caught have genuine remorse and in effect have learned their lesson because they never want to go through such a thing again. If they lie to get out from under legal penalties, it might not harm anyone else greatly, nor even themselves in not undergoing a human punishment, but it will always be seen as a moral shortcut by the law of karma, because this is true of all lies, big or small. So one must think carefully about the trade offs involved and being too self serving, because it can come back to haunt you through the law of karma, seeking a kind of comeuppance that makes you pay back what you gained from the lie and perhaps something more in the bargain.
So there's creators hinting here at a big calculus. The law of karma is something that is integral to life and something we talk about in the Get Wisdom Project quite a bit. And creators making it quite plain here. There's no such thing as a lie that's not going to be seen by the law of karma and return to you something in terms of a comeuppance, right? I mean, that's creators saying that here point blank. But when it comes to white lies, creators also saying that they see the divine realm. Creator sees the practicalities. The creator's not. Creator understands, essentially. Doesn't necessarily always advocate, but understands and recognizes that there are situations where sometimes there's a lesser of two evils, and that's really, I think, where the art of living comes in, Carl.
Yes, and this is what we're probing today, and it's a useful lesson because much of life is probably situations where there's more temptation to make small lies or misrepresentations or covering things up or not being fully open and straightforward and honest and holding back things that might be an important issue if the other party knows, but you don't say anything because it's not in your best interest. Well, these are gray areas, and it's much more likely to be the case than when your life is on the line and you got to lie about having committed a felony or something.
Right.
That happens to relatively few people, thank goodness. And of course, that's a life crisis for that individual. So there's a lot we need to know, and I'm glad we're having this discussion. I've met many people, of course, in the course of my time, and I've met people who are chronic liars. I've met many more who are just clever manipulators of others, and lying does figure into that. But it gets noticed too,
Yes.
and that can be part of a karmic repayment. And I think the starting point here to keep in mind is you can lie because of free will, but you'll never get away with it.
Right.
It might be you get away with it for a time, but eventually there'll be some way that gets rebalanced, and you'll pay that rebalancing in some way or another.
I agreed. U.S. creator Pamela Meyer said, "White lies keep social dignity intact and are far more prevalent than most people realize. Several studies have found that an average person is lied to from 10 to 200 times a day, mostly just to keep a conversation going, to avoid conflict, or to establish a connection with someone." What is creator's perspective?
All right, and creator tells us this commentary, taken in isolation, purports to provide a rationale for living through the white lie because everyone does it. And in such a world, it is almost impossible to compete and not do oneself. Indeed, a truth teller among a group of liars will be at a considerable disadvantage, but we would look at the wider view. What is gained to be a prince among thieves compared to becoming a thief oneself? We favor the high ground in every interchange as the best course of action and the road to divine alignment, so one is on a divine path much or most of the time. That will serve you much better than breaking rules, breaking social compacts, breaking trust, and all of the consequences that lying might bring. We do appreciate it at the same time that you are bringing forth comments about white lies, and they indeed are in somewhat of a different category because, by definition, they are lies that do relatively little harm and, in fact, may have a silver lining that protects the person being lied to, as well as the liar from awkwardness, unnecessary complications, misunderstandings, and consequences that could be avoided altogether, but for the issue of truth telling getting in the way and spoiling things. Sometimes an ugly truth can be sidestepped to prevent things coming to a head that are not necessary to dwell on or even point out. And if a white lie saves someone from such unpleasantness, it can be argued the white lie is a blessing and the wiser course of action in turning to that strategy. We agree there are such situations, and these come up fairly often. And this, again, is a consequence of yours being such an imperfect world. People are corrupt, people are inadequate, people are manipulated to be inferior. And the very nature of physical existence creates many obstacles and setbacks beyond your control. And these conditions harm everyone. So, any way in which order can be preserved, trust maintained, and efficiency protected through using a white lie to keep people happy, this will clearly be the lesser of evils. So, while we do not endorse this categorically, we agree there are situations where it might be the wisest thing to do in the moment to prevent a greater hurt or harmful consequence that can be avoided. But we cannot endorse anything out of divine alignment categorically, as there are exceptions to every rule. So it is important to realize when you go down that road, you are moving out of alignment. So it behooves you to keep your wits about you and think carefully about the choice you are making, to not venture too far off the straight and narrow path. The law of karma can be a harsh reminder of the need for divinity in all one does, but it will recognize mitigating factors. And included in this is also divine grace that might well be a factor in allowing you to get away with a white lie now and again if it serves a greater good.
Wow, I think that last sentence is uh, really one to read and read again. that's um, that's a very, very powerful revelation from Creator. But I mean, it's a recognition that there are mitigating circumstances. There is divine grace. There's a recognition that some situations actually call for a white lie, where the greater good is going to be manifested by doing a white lie rather than telling the naked, ugly truth. But boy, go with caution. This is an area that takes great wisdom to be able to master, Carl.
Yes, and we often hear from Creator the term slippery slope,
Yes.
which is very apt because there are many directions we might head where we're drawn downward and it's harder to get back to the high ground if you're on an incline, and if it's greased to
Yep.
encourage a fall from grace and alignment, it's all the harder. And one thing that I think most people can see and appreciate here is the temptation to take the comfort and reward of using the white lie as an all too ready choice
Yes.
that's convenient and helps smooth your day. So why not? Whatever, I'm not losing it. I'll just kind of overlook this and just ignore that and just pretend everything's fine and this will all go away. And you end up rationalizing wrongdoing and inappropriate conduct because you can use your words to deflect criticism or any kind of probing inquiry. And this is, I think, where people get on that slippery slope and then may not be able to get back.
Yeah. My, you know, I've told white lies. I'm sure you have. It's basically it's impossible to be human and not engage with them occasionally. But I like to think of a white lie as like a spare tire in the trunk. You know, it's to be used when the tire's going flat, and changing a tire is a pain in the the keister, So they're to be used sparingly and only when really needed. It's not something that should be used liberally. This is my own personal philosophy.
Well, that's a good policy, I think, because then you're going to be very aware and careful and cautious about when you apply it and when you don't.
Because I was
And
looking at
that can save you.
Oh, absolutely. And I was looking at the question, where it was pointed out that the average person is lied to. That's me and you. We're average, right, Carl? The average person is lied to 10 to 100 times a day, depending on, I guess, the circumstances. So that's a pretty sobering statistic if it's true. U.S. creator Barry Ritholtz said, "Little white lies are told by humans all the time. Indeed, lying is often how we get through each day in a happy little bubble. We spend time and energy rationalizing our own behaviors, beliefs, and decision-making processes." What is creator's perspective?
All right. And this is what creator says. Having told you that there are times when a white lie is a lesser evil, we must also caution that whether an untruth is a white lie or something darker is in the eye of the beholder, and humans are often inaccurate in their assessment of moral imperatives and consequences. So, this can be a slippery slope and become a habit that is an all too easy mode of operating. And before long, a person who indulges in white lies to keep the peace and not ruffle feathers finds this is such a useful self serving strategy, they will lie about many, many things in order to look good and be accepted when that is not truly justified, but used to cover up their own shortcomings and mistakes. In a sense, we could teach a course in the art of lying. But this is something each person must figure out for themselves, given you are in charge and not us. And we cannot stop you from making a karmic misstep, only warn you that it will have a consequence. So it is wise to keep in mind that telling a white lie to serve another is a different matter than telling a white lie to serve the self many times. That is not an absolute rule, but a guide in how to think about the potential dilemma you create in deviating from the truth. A white lie that serves another person is more likely to be morally defensible than a white lie that serves the self. But that is, of course, a rule of thumb and has many possible situations where exceptions are needed because the self is not inferior. You are just as valuable as anyone else, and in a fair world, all would consider one another as equals. The risk one takes is in realizing that when it comes to the self, you have an ego that wants to prevail, to excel, to be in control, and to be accepted, and if possible, respected and even cherished by others. And this is where problems will crop up. It is all too easy to find oneself lying to serve the ego more so than being a way to safeguard one's soul in a harsh environment where something lied about is truly not other people's business or will cause no harm to keep secret. This is a major source of complications and tension as you go about your day to day living. The farther you are away from divine alignment, the more the ego will have control of things. And this is why maintaining divine alignment is so very important because things will become more and more distorted as you lose the divine perspective in living your life. The danger is you may not be able to find your way back again.
Well, absolutely. Creators making it very clear. Honesty is definitely the best policy and should be the default setting for all of us. Um, I know myself, where I've used white lies is exactly where a creator is coming across and saying, trying to let somebody down easy, for instance. And sometimes it could be just not a big deal, but let's say I have a lunch date that was made casually with somebody that's an acquaintance but not a super close friend, maybe a work appointment or something, and then our friend comes to town. You know, um, I might tell a white lie when I let the other guy down and say I can't make it. I might not say, hey, I got a better friend than you that I want to spend time with, so, and I want to safeguard my coworkers' feelings and not let them know that they were the loser of a choice I made, in terms of who I'd rather spend company with. And so I might tell a white lie and say, oh, I had something come up. I gotta please my boss or whatever. I'm not advocating that. I'm just kind of, confessing here, Father Carl. But I see what Creator's saying about, if you're focusing on the other person and their safety, their health, their happiness, then that might balance out.
Okay, well, just don't give me your problems, my
That's
friend. You're on the wheel of karma, so
that's right.
God help you.
Is it the wheel or the rack? I'm not sure. Okay, well, it's a good time to talk about maybe getting out of this rut, and getwisdom.com is the way to do it. So check out getwisdom.com today. You can find it at the address getwisdom.com, and we have all kinds of offerings over there. We have the Divine Wisdom Database, which is free and open to anybody who wants to go look at it. We encourage you to sign up to be our participant member. It's eternally free. You get access to like 80% of our content by doing so. But if you just want to kind of check us out, the Divine Wisdom Database is a really good way to do that. And you can access it quickly at getwisdom.com/DB. That's getwisdom.com/DB. There's over 6,000 questions, probably approaching 7,000. I haven't checked recently, where they're questions to creators, similar to what we've asking on the radio show. In fact, a lot of the questions in Get Wisdom Live and in the past radio shows end up right in the database, and you can search them and find answers to questions on all kinds of topics, gazillion topics. We have thousands of questions, so there's certainly hundreds of topics, Carl.
Yes, and it's growing and it's important because we're probing into things of dire importance to humanity and its future. We tend not to delve too deeply into the darkness with these kinds of programs because there's many things to discuss, and it's a turnoff for people at first blush to be into the cesspool right away, but
Right.
there is one out there. So enough said. And the idea is that if you can be in divine alignment, that helps you in every kind of situation. You can stand strong and make your way and make a contribution rather than be a drag on humanity. And that's the point of life, to do your best.
Absolutely. Carl, you asked Creator. Dale Carnegie wrote the multi-million bestseller, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Advocates would say that Carnegie taught a method of manipulating people that created win-win scenarios where both the manipulated and manipulators benefited. The detractors would say Carnegie's methods can be used to screw people over. Any kind of indirect manipulation is problematic as it arguably violates free will, especially if used to encourage uninformed decisions. Hypnotist and researcher Dick Sutphin wrote of Carnegie in his book, Radical Spirituality. The Carnegie course teaches you to say what will work to get you what you want. Isn't that being phony or a hypocrite? Forget sincerity, forget honesty, forget being real. Carnegie teaches you to be a diplomat and wear a mask. Masks are the fear that who and what you are isn't adequate, so you pretend to be somebody else. What is Creator's perspective?
All right, and Creator tells us, we would agree that based on this description, a slippery slope is being created that will make it harder and harder for someone manipulating others through adopting a kind of false persona to return to divine alignment. Carnegie's prescription is, in essence, a way to achieve personal power, and that always carries with it a risk of transgression where one becomes out of balance through serving the self at the expense of others being manipulated to create an advantage for self-reward. The fact that someone else might not know the difference is used as a justification that it doesn't really hurt anyone. But that is a false conclusion because a lie is a lie. And serving the self by making someone happy through a falsehood in effect, cheats them because it is promoting the self as an answer to a situation or problem in some respect by commanding attention and action of some sort. The fact you might convince someone you are what they need and you can offer your services or just friendship because you are a person of sufficient substance, capability, talent, and accomplishment, for example, short circuits things because if they see you as worthy and are content for you to occupy their time and energy based on a false representation of your talents, it cheats them of the opportunity to engage with others and find something more rewarding for them. So we see the approach that Carnegie promotes as a self serving exercise that is a kind of manipulation and unworthy of a divine human because it departs from the truth in a deliberate fashion. And in the doing, becomes a kind of inner corruption that is training you to assume things about yourself that are an exaggeration or a distortion in some respect you cannot live up to if challenged and really subjected to scrutiny. So, in the short term, it is taking risks of being found out to be an imposter. And in the long term, creates a situation where, to some extent, you are indeed living a lie, and that will take a toll on you karmically. Even though people around you might be satisfied with your efforts, that is not the same thing as giving them the full measure of what they want and need. By fooling them into settling for less, a kind of illusion you create through stretching the truth, you are also cheating yourself because you are gaining something not truly and fully deserved. And we can tell you that anything you acquire through personal power to manipulate others will someday be taken away from you. And it might be further magnified to the extent others were losers because of what they lost being diverted by your false front to engage with you and not others who might serve them better.
So I don't think we've ever asked Creator this question directly, but I'm getting the sense that Creator would not be a big fan of the term "fake it till you make it," Carl.
I was thinking the same thing during the course of this answer. This is something bandied about in many settings in teaching situations where people are learning a craft or developing some kind of professional expertise and might feel shaky at first. And it might well be the case that they are not very skilled. And even as they launch and go forth independently and engage with people who maybe are not aware of their newly minted and not
Yes,
as expert at what they're doing as they might come across to be.
right.
So this is a tough one. Here we go. The practicalities of life. You
Yeah.
know, what do you tell people if you're this is your first sale, this is your first,
Yes.
action on behalf of someone with some professional skill and so on. And I mean, do you just lead with that? Well, I've never actually painted a house, but I'm eager to try it.
Yeah.
I've watched
Exactly.
my
Yes.
other painter friends do this, and
It's it
and
is
I
a dilemma.
practiced, a little bit, but so yeah. So here you go. These are the moral choices that are real world.
Yes.
But Creator
It's
is being a little tough with us and saying you might need to serve yourself to have a future, but it is going to misserve others to some extent because you're not as ready as others are who are far ahead of you. And
yes.
so it's just reality.
Yes.
So
And I think creators also, it might be the harder road to hoe to be brutally, more forthright in terms of the amount of experience you have, and I'm a newbie and all that. But that's what apprenticeships were for traditionally as well.
exactly.
You know, and
Yeah. And that's a model that's time tested
yes, it is.
and
And
proven to be valuable. And in fact, we've got a whole course of instruction and divine wisdom about that model being far superior to the way we educate the young in our current culture. That most of education is a time wasting and deception and manipulation and nothing valuable. It's
Yeah.
empty. And to have a world where kids can get involved with real world things as apprentices is a much better course that sets them up in life to have useful skills and abilities
Yes.
and teaches them the right way and eases them in,
Yeah.
while they can afford to take the time to do that. They're not an adult that has to live on their own, pay their rent,
Right.
and all of that.
Yeah, we really need to find a way to get back to that, and that has been so much falling out of favor. We don't want to go off on a too big a tangent on education, but the whole apprenticeship thing is it's faltering. It's not moving forward. And maybe you're familiar with Mike Rowe. I don't know, but he's a big personality out there that's really advocating a return to apprenticeships, and it's fallen on hard times. The whole thing. So it's something we need to get back to for sure. U.S.
Well,
creator. Oh, go ahead, Carl. Go ahead.
my only comment is there's probably a reason because
Oh
it's
yes,
being suppressed
yes, agreed.
because it works.
Yes, because it works exactly, and the interlopers are always on the lookout to pull the rug out from anything that does work for humanity. So, U.S. creator Sutphin additionally said this about Carnegie techniques: if you use Carnegie techniques to win friends, the friendship has to be based upon a two-way manipulation. You pretend to be the mask to attain friendship, and they will be your friend as long as you wear it. What happens when the mask slips and they find out who you really are? Do you need any relationship or association so badly that you're willing to repress your real self in order to attain it? Many would answer yes. They have a mortgage to pay and must wear the mask in order to stay employed. Sutphin was an independent businessman and had more freedom in that regard. So, what is Creator's perspective?
All right. And this is what Creator tells us. Despite his personal freedom to not be dependent on others to the extent many, many are who work for a living and rely on others for their support and backing, we agree with his assessment as a general description of the moral considerations involved with fooling others as a way of operating to maintain one's status, whether it be employment, leadership of a group, or a personal relationship. In a sense, everyone has encounters where they want to make a good impression, and so will put their best foot forward, so to speak, to display themselves and their talents to best advantage. So they make a good impression and at least establish their credentials potentially for inspection. This is a time honored custom that not only makes the self look good, but is considered a token of respect in honoring the value of others to do one's best to be cordial and a pleasing presence and experience with any encounter, at least with the first introduction. In a sense, this is a kind of customary test of character, refinement, intelligence, and maturity. But that is not the same thing as truly putting on a mask to fool someone into thinking you are better than they are. After all, when you put your best foot forward, it is still your foot. So if you dress nicely, wear makeup, take extra care to have your shoes shined, and so on, you are not lying that you possess a wardrobe and know how to keep it in good condition. And these are small matters compared to the higher virtues people grow to depend on among their friends and workmates, let alone life partners or comrades in arms. The danger is, as we have been discussing with you, that when a false front is created, it is perpetuating a lie that can come back to haunt a person and will always, in some way, represent a liability for both parties, whether it is recognized for what it represents or someone gets away with the mask wearing for the duration. Because the law of karma will know and it will seek a reckoning eventually for such misrepresentations. There are many who feel compelled to be more of an actor than genuine in their relationships. That too is a slippery slope because the more dependent you become for such relationships, the more you are trapped in living as an imposter. And that can take a toll from a buildup of inner stress because of the uncertainty of your situation. If you are found to be wanting at some point along the way, if you are seen without the mask inadvertently, and people begin to question your worth or validity in how you conduct yourself. So it is quite true that any false compact through a misrepresentation will begin to develop a kind of personal and karmic debt that builds and builds over time to increase both the burden it represents to be maintained indefinitely and the liability from that day of reckoning that will come eventually, if not in the current life, in a subsequent lifetime.
Well, clearly, mask wearing is a problem for society as in general. I mean, there's a reason why you need a resume, right, and a background check and all this other stuff, is because unfortunately it's a common resort that people fall back on, to put a mask on and not represent their true selves in a certain situation. So, Dick Sutphin, who did seminars for most of his career, um, could be called Master of Life seminars, this is one of the more popular ones, claimed to be able to always tell a Dale Carnegie student and would unmask them. maybe not doing anybody a favor. He might be incurring karma himself when he did that, but he would unmask them in his seminars and say, "You're a Carnegie guy, aren't you?" And it's like, "Yeah, what about it?" Because he could see right through it. So um, masks are not necessarily the best go-to, Carl.
Well, and I have to say that the place I see this all the time is in the arena of politics.
Yeah.
So this is just food for thought. I'm not here to play sides. I mean, both sides play this game, and it's kind of customary in today's world. And I think that's one of the things that makes it worse, because everybody's wearing masks,
Yep.
and they do it very, cynically and strategically to misrepresent, to get the most votes. If they can't be all things to all people, they'll lie. And they have a certain audience in front of them or a certain topic, they'll self-peddle their hardcore views at times. All these things happen.
Oh, yeah.
And so, but there are consequences. And, I feel for the average person who may be in a nation where their leader gets a karmic comeuppance for so many years of doing political hardball or whatever you want to call it. And then that reckoning happens on their watch still, and you're an underling in that country, and then there's hell to pay, and you
Right.
pay it as much
Yeah.
as the leader. So it's an unfortunate circumstance, but I think this is one of the examples you can see in your day-to-day life of mask wearing, and be the recipient of the consequence of it, because you're not really knowing that person. You're seeing their mask, and you don't
Yep.
know what's going on behind the scenes. And it might matter. It might not to some degree, but it might.
Yeah, exactly. Agree completely. U.S. creator, a close cousin of white lies are lies of omission. In navigating this world, one encounters people with false impressions based on judgments made quickly with incomplete information, or biases where contrary evidence is simply ignored. In these situations, allowing a person to continue believing and acting in a way that is contrary to the actual truth of a situation is often characterized as lying by omission. There can be countless motivations for doing this, from greed to sympathy to even personal safety. Some would argue that lies of omission are just as dishonest as overt lies. What is Creator's perspective?
All right. And Creator tells us the situation is very much a close parallel to the complications of using white lies, because lies of omission, in effect, are a kind of manipulation to not own up to the reality of the situation in some respect, in order to maintain the assumptions of others as a way of gaining something for the self, in being accepted more readily, when if one were more truthful, it might bring up something to invite criticism, or being seen in a prejudiced way. And so in such a position, one might feel pressure to mislead, using a lie of omission to avoid being probed more thoroughly and risk being called into question for misrepresenting oneself. But of course, to continue maintaining that omission perpetuates the misrepresentation and adds to the potential consequences. After all, a lie of omission might simply be a temporary circumstance for any number of reasons, but made up for later with full disclosure, perhaps when in private or to make a special outreach to correct a possible misinterpretation. In other words, to come clean at the risk of even being rejected. That would certainly be taking the high ground and being scrupulous to not misrepresent oneself and take advantage of others who might falsely assume too much of you. And to let that stand is a misrepresentation involving moral imperatives and karmic consequences. So we agree with the characterization that as a general rule, lies of omission are often just as dishonest as overt lies. They might seem more acceptable because they happen due to the false assumptions of others and not a deliberate falsehood being proffered. But to not speak up and correct a false assumption that puts you in a better light that is not deserved is comparable in every way to having told a lie to make yourself look good. Such situations are what the conscience is for. And normally people will feel troubled if something happens and they're given credit where it's not really due. And rather than let it stand, we'll go and confess there was a misunderstanding and they want to set the record straight. That is a good demonstration of character, and in most cases will be much appreciated as a witness to honest action when someone could easily perpetuate and benefit from flattering opinion of them as a kind of cheating. The fact there is not a referee present to call them out in falsely accepting undue recognition or praise does not mean they are following the rules. The law of karma is always watching and will have the final say.
Well, Creator's always reminding us the law of karma is there and is always watching. So just take note of that. But this is interesting that Creator comes basically out and says that a lie of omission, probably in most circumstances, certainly not all, is every bit as egregious as an overt lie.
Well, and this is again, there are myriad situations like this.
Yes.
Because every time there's an introduction and people are getting to know you, there may be assumptions they're making, and there may be presumptions you're making in entering and offering yourself in a new setting. And sometimes, that's perfectly understandable. If you wanting to advance to a level you have not really been at yet, it's a leap of faith, and you might have a leap of confidence that gets you into the arena for inspection, but you can't go in assuming you're going to fail because that gets telegraphed to the others and they'll see you as likely unworthy. If you don't even have the confidence to, make the claim you can do the role. So this invites many kinds of difficulties and inner conflicts of all kinds. I have lots of clients whose main issue is they feel like they're an imposter. And it's not truly that they are, it's because emotionally they feel unworthy in some respect. They feel vulnerable and they've been roughed up by life enough to know it can happen. And they're not sure they can handle things. And they doubt themselves and so on. So this is a big dilemma. Yeah. And this can encourage someone to turn to a device like lying to cement that in place as a kind of defense and maybe not realize if they're honest, they can keep going still. It won't be the end of everything and they can grow into the role legitimately. Yeah. And that's where healing comes in to help people, bridge those kind of gaps.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about healing towards the end of the show, as we always do. But since we're on the topic of healing, Carl, people can take a time out right now and download the Lightworker Healing Protocol ebook. Get it at getwisdom.com/LHP, getwisdom.com/LHP. And also check out our healing services at the website, getwisdom.com. There's a healing tab there. Go on and click on that and explore it and find out what's available. You asked Creator Carl. Dr. Viktor Frankl wrote that in his opinion, it was possible to lie with the truth. He cited as an example a man who came to him plagued with guilt about an illicit affair he had some 20 years earlier. His wife had never learned of it and was still ignorant of it when he sought Dr. Frankl's advice. Dr. Frankl implored him not to tell her. His reason for doing so was because he believed the man truly loved his wife and had no desire to traumatize her. Based on what he knew of the man's wife, he was convinced there was little to no chance of the wife receiving the news without drawing the false conclusion that he did not love her and consequently would not be able to forgive him. So he attempted to coach the man that telling her the truth would be akin to lying, for it would encourage her to believe a lie that her husband did not ever love her. The man ignored Frankl's advice, and the result was an ugly divorce with both parties deeply emotionally traumatized. Was Frankl right? What is Creator's perspective?
All right, and Creator says, here again is a good illustration that there is a time and a place for truth, and a time and a place to shield someone from unpleasantness that serves no useful purpose, and moreover is likely to be quite destructive in such a situation to adhere strictly to conveying truth that would end up doing greater harm. This is very much akin to the issue of people having a tremendous past history they are largely unaware of, but can access the Akashic records via their deep subconscious and dream about it. If they are told by a psychic medium, for example, they have done something horrendous in a past life, without offering a way for them to heal the karmic consequences, it becomes a kind of hexing that can haunt them and cause grave damage in imparting fear that now they will be punished, that God might not love them, that they might be a worse person than even they believed, and so on. The situation described is a perfect example of a beneficial lie that is a lie of omission, but shields the wife from a severe overreaction that would cause harm to both parties when that could be avoided in a genuine love still shared by the couple. That is a far better outcome than adhering to the seemingly high standard of holding to truth scrupulously and to a fault in this case. The admonition in our rule for living to raise up others with no harm to the self and raise up the self with no harm to others is illustrated beautifully in this moral dilemma, seemingly. If you look simply at who benefits and why, and who is harmed and why, through sharing the true life history that would be damning for the husband, it is reduced to a kind of energetic equation that is perhaps more manageable to see in the light of how to proceed than an arbitrary black and white interpretation of right versus wrong, truth versus falsehood can convey. There are practical consequences from every life decision and choice of action, and it is the energetic consequence that is utmost in importance. To be sure, an energetic consequence can play out as guilt when truth is avoided inappropriately and the conscience takes a toll on a person. But that is simply an extension of what we are suggesting here as a way of dealing with such dilemmas, to analyze their merits, pro and con, with the choices being considered, and to honor both parties and the relative degree of negativity either way. That will be a useful guide in most instances. There are many examples where people can see truth to a much greater degree, and because most humans are flawed, and many deeply so, one who sees this, even though representing in that respect a higher authority with respect to knowledge and discernment, to go around criticizing people for their flaws might be an exercise in truth telling, but fails dismally in terms of morality. Because in the energetic equation of what is lost and what is gained, it becomes very clear that someone told about their flaws, over which they may have little ability to change, can be deeply hurt rather than helped. And to be the one in a position to point out their shortcomings only gains a reward to their ego, because seeing someone else as being lesser is not a feat of greatness.
Boy, this answer to this question, which I've been wanting to ask for a long time. I've been aware of this Frankel anecdote, and I've been wanting to run it by a creator for quite some time. And this is a perfect opportunity to do so. And the answer was just met my expectations and blew them out of the water. I think this answer is incredibly a profound response to Frankel's really interesting dilemma, Carl.
Well, and it's a lesson for life, that if you think about the energy of love and the absence of love, or maybe it's opposite, if people react badly to hearing a truth that might be shielded from them, that can help you thread the needle
Yeah,
better than anything, I believe. So if you think about, where does love need to go to set things right? Who will gain love? Who will lose love? And that can help you apply a kind of moral compass in making tough choices when, as creator is pointing out, if you go strictly by rules, you're going to maybe step on toes you don't need to, and maybe damage things
yeah.
greatly.
On this case, also, Frankel said something very interesting that I'd like to share. He was, in his opinion, Frankel's opinion, he pointed out to the gentleman, unfortunately not successfully, but pointed out to him that the guilt of the relationship, the illicit relationship, the affair he had, was his. It was his cross to bear. And by telling his wife the truth, he was hoping to basically get off that cross and not have that guilt anymore. So Frankel considered it a selfish desire, that he was not, not only was he, potentially going to hurt his wife, traumatize her, but he was actually trying to unload his own burden onto her. And that kind of amplified the situation even more. So I thought that'd be an interesting thing to point out.
Well, and this is what following rules sometimes does. It directs you in a way that makes you feel like you're doing the right thing. But in actuality, in serving the rule over the cause of love, you're just getting off the hook and
Yeah,
saving yourself,
right.
and thinking you are anyway, because you're following the rule, and it's a convenience that is for helping you personally. But if it harms someone else more than it serves you, it's not appropriate.
No, no, agreed completely. You asked creator, informed consent is obviously important to most people and a fundamentally fair way to manage human affairs. Yet, in the realm of remote healing, it is possible to heal or attempt to heal someone without their knowledge, which would render moot any notion of their consent. Isn't that dishonest? Can Creator tell us if empowered prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol are exempt from that concern? And if so, why?
All right. And this is what Creator tells us. We see the principle of informed consent as being quite important and many times vital to preserve your rights with respect to personal sovereignty. And this can save you from many potential adverse consequences in giving you a warning. There may be hazards or trade offs in what is being offered. And so you have an opportunity to think carefully about proceeding. The same principle applies to any kind of healing that is offered by people in service to others. If one is an energy healer, for example, who works remotely, sending their energy into a person uninvited might be well meaning, but it is nonetheless an intrusion. And the reality is that sometimes it might be harmful because well meaning healers do not fully understand the details of what they are doing energetically. And they might end up being a bull in a china shop, so to speak, and even potentially injure someone or stir up new problems unexpectedly because there is a delicate balance underway they are not privy to. Using empowered prayer or the Lightworker Healing Protocol, which is a divine healing remote instrument, are exceptions to this ethical imperative, but for specific reasons. When you pray for someone, you are not intruding on them. You are not sending your energy into them. It is the divine realm that will act on the prayer, and that will only happen if the intended recipient of divine action gives consent through their higher self, as consulted by Creator, prior to doing anything to bring in a change. That is a firm rule of engagement, that the divine will not interfere with human lives in any way unasked. So, what we are telling you is, in effect, the divine realm receives a go ahead or not, as the case might be, from the higher self, and in effect gives informed consent for Creator to bring assistance or healing as requested, and will do so in the highest and best way to not cause harm to the person. And if anything, will use divine caution to not overstep the boundaries and cause an unintended consequence, even at the risk of not helping to the fullest. That is a measure of how scrupulous the morality and ethics truly are in responding to prayer requests. The same is true for the Lightworker Healing Protocol, which has much greater power because of its intelligence and awareness of how the divine realm heals. And so is requesting the most powerful and detailed healing strategies in a comprehensive fashion that covers all the bases needed to deal with any kind of problem. But here as well, Creator will consult the higher self of the intended recipient for permission for each and every step of the protocol. So while their conscious self need not know that healing for them has been requested through a practitioner of the Lightworker Healing Protocol, their higher self at a soul level will be consulted for permission, and that is in keeping with the moral and ethical requirements to be in divine alignment and truly serve the parties involved and their best interests without bending or breaking rules. Many times, the conscious self is so corrupted, it is the last source of counsel to be considered in making a decision of whether to have a divine intervention take place. After all, the person might be a non believer, but still able to be helped if a believer requests this to happen. In an emergency, it is better to save someone who is doomed themselves, if that is possible, than to let that self destructive stance hold sway and determine their fate. So, a healer reaching out to someone not consulted at a conscious level is on firm ground, going through the divine realm to apply each and every requested intervention, and not the healer personally, because the divine will stay within its charter to do no harm. And unlike human medicine, psychological therapies, and even alternative healing strategies done by human healers, can truly see to this in a way no human resource can guarantee. Given you are in a world where you must ask for help when you are in need, if someone is unable to do this, either because they do not believe in the divine or do not believe in themselves to be worthy, and will not likely be able to receive divine assistance because of deep inner beliefs that are self limiting and must be honored as the person's free will, an outside party among the living can be an effective advocate to arrange a divine intervention on their behalf, in spite of their own limitations, to mount an effective outreach to the divine. We have imparted divine wisdom in great measure to your channel, both about empowered prayer, so people have prayers that work, and the Lightworker Healing Protocol as the premier healing tool for all manner of assistance needed by humans to survive, keep going, and flourish ultimately. These approaches, through forming a divine partnership, are truly the answer for humanity in a most difficult time when things are so working against you and human progress and even continued survival are uncertain given the forces of evil arrayed against you. There are many ways we can help you individually and collectively, but there must be humans making specific requests for this to happen. It is time to step up and play your part in this grand collaboration at a turning point in the history of the universe.
No small words. And in fact, because this has kind of been an episode on the art of living, Carl, it'd be remiss for us not to mention the 10 principles of the art of living. You can download that at getwisdom.com/TEN. That's getwisdom.com/TEN. But once again, the Lightworker Healing Protocol is held up as the means by which to take part in this history-changing part of the universe the turning point that we're facing, that Creator says we're right up against it.
Well, we're here to solve the problem of evil. That's why humanity was created. That can only be done through healing, not through war, not through police action, using weapons and politics to manipulate and control, using healing, divine grace. We're here to summon that in a way that will work. And we're being taught for the first time how to go about doing that so we can be effective as an advocate for Creator's plan to save and heal humanity by first healing the interlopers who are subjugating us. If we don't deal with them first, we can't make it. And there need to be more healers, more people working with prayer in a powerful way on this problem. And anyone can do this. So we're showing the way, providing the tools, and we need you who are listening to rally to the call to action here by the Almighty. This is why we are all here. And if you want to make your life count, this is the way to do it.
Absolutely. Check us out, getwisdom.com. Download the Lightworker Healing Protocol ebook, getwisdom.com/LHP, and our prayer book, getwisdom.com/prayer. And that's all we have for this Get Wisdom Live, Carl. Thanks, everybody.
Be well.